Okay, hello. We're back with lesson 2 for learning to read with Malcolm X. Just give me a second so I can figure out how to present it. There we go. So last time we looked at the exigence. So we're looking at this rhetorical framework again. The exigence is that beginning step. This is where you get that spark. It's where any kind of author or writer is getting this idea of, I have something to share. And like it says here, this works in nonfiction, fiction, poetry, drama, movies, TVs, anything. You have to start with that exigence or that spark first. So then you can see, once you've decided the exigence, that inciting incident that you're like, I need to tell somebody this, then you need to think about, who are you going to tell? Who is your audience? So who should receive your message, or it could be who is going to be receptive to your message. Sometimes it's easier to write for an audience that you already know. For instance, writing essays in school, you know who your audience is going to be. It's going to be your teacher. So you know exactly who is going to be reading your work. But when it comes to writing stories or writing texts of some kind, your audience, you might have a target, but it might end up actually being wider than that, or unfortunately sometimes more narrow, if you can't quite reach your audience. So we're going to begin by looking at the actual text itself. Let's see if I can make myself really small. There we go. So we're going to be looking at the text itself here. Remember that this is an excerpt, so this is from his overall autobiography, so this is not the entire thing. This is an excerpt, but for our purposes, it's enough. What we're looking for here, after we've talked about the exigence, is we're looking for audience. Okay, that's our next step. So I'm going to read aloud this section, and I want you to keep in mind and think, who is he writing to? So the best ways to think about audience is first think about point of view. So think about, is this written in first person? Is this written in third person? Then you can kind of look to see if there's any specific notions about setting or place. And then if you get so lucky, you might get a specific reference to an audience. So that's what we're kind of looking for right off the bat, just to see if we can find the specific audience. Okay. It was because of my letters that I happened to stumble upon starting to acquire some kind of homemade education. Sorry, let me restart. It was because of my letters that I happened to stumble upon starting to acquire some kind of homemade education. I became increasingly frustrated at not being able to express what I wanted to convey in letters that I wrote, especially those to Mr. Elijah Muhammad. In the street, I had been the most articulate hustler out there. I had commanded attention when I said something. But now, trying to write simple English, I not only wasn't articulate, I wasn't even functional. How would I sound writing in slang the way I would say it? Something such as, "Look, Daddy, let me pull your coat about a cat, Elijah Muhammad." Many who today hear me somewhere in person or on television, or those who've read something I've said, will think I went to school far beyond the 8th grade. This impression is due entirely to my prison studies. It had really begun back in the Charleston prison, when Bimby first made me feel envy of his stock of knowledge. Bimby had always taken charge of any conversations he was in, and I tried to emulate him. But every book I picked up had few sentences which didn't contain anywhere from one to nearly all the words that might as well have been in Chinese. When I just skipped those words, of course, I really ended up with little idea of what the book said. So I had to come to Norfolk Prison Colony, still going through only book reading motions. Pretty soon, I would have to quit even these motions, unless I received the motivation that I did. Okay, first things first, let's look at point of view. This one should be pretty obvious to us because we can identify point of view based on the actual words themselves. Right away, we get I. We know he's writing in first person. Oops, let me go back. We know he's writing in first person. So we pretty clearly know that he's speaking to us directly, and he's also speaking to us as himself. He's not speaking to us as some character. We do get a little bit of setting in place. We know that he's going to Charleston Prison and the Norfolk Prison Colony. So we know where this is happening. But even further than that, we have a larger grand scheme of things because we know that he says, many today have heard me. He says this already because now we have a specific reference to an audience. He is writing to people who have already heard him speak. He tells us, many who today hear me in prison or on television or read something I've said. So we know he already has an audience. He's already speaking to someone. And this autobiography is just an additional bonus for those people who are already listening to him. You might assume that because he's speaking on television, he might have a pretty broad audience, and you'd probably be right. Even in this day and age and in history, television audiences are much broader than those of texts, of novels or written works, because you're also going to get people that may not agree with you. But because it's on television, it is easier to access that wider audience. So let's think back to that exigence. Remember, that's that spark. He realizes, oh my gosh, I need education, and in fact, I need self-education. And now we get his audience. His audience is thinking, wow, you might have the impression that he went to school beyond the 8th grade. So he's talking to his audience here. He says, you think you have got this impression that I've gone to school past the 8th grade. He's specifically talking to the audience here of the autobiography and people who've heard him speak before. So maybe he wants to clarify himself for them. Maybe he wants to address their misconception. We're going to need to read a little bit more to get specific, but I think that we can assume for right now that his audience is people who are willing to listen to what he has to say. So let's go back and think about this. You know the exigence, now we're at his audience. Most likely it's going to be people who are interested with the civil rights movement during this time period. Now let's think about purpose. Okay? Why? Why is he doing this? Why does he care? Let's read on a little bit. I saw the best thing I could do was get a hold of a dictionary, to study, to learn some words. I was lucky enough to reason also that I should try to improve my penmanship. It was sad. I couldn't even write in a straight line. It was both ideas together that moved me to request a dictionary, along with some tablets and pencils from the Norfolk Prison Colony School. I spent 2 days just rifling uncertainly through the dictionary's pages. I'd never knew so many words existed. I'd never realized so many words existed. I didn't know which words I needed to learn. Finally, just to start some kind of action, I began copying. Okay, so let's think about his purpose here. We know that the title of this is Learning to Read, but he isn't actually telling us how he learned to read. He's telling us that he started with the idea of, oh my gosh, I need to learn some words. I need to learn some more words, and I also need to improve my penmanship. Okay, so that's his starting purpose. Why does he start to learn to read? He realizes, I need to learn more, and I need to learn to write better for himself. Okay, so then the question comes is, who cares? Why would he need to write this for his audience? What's his purpose? What's his purpose? He's sort of drawing us in here. You can tell he's drawing us in because he's telling us this story. It's unfolding slowly. He tells you, I was a street hustler. I felt like I was really articulate, like people could understand me. But then once I met these other people, I realized I wasn't as articulate as I thought. So then I decided to get a dictionary, and then I began copying from the dictionary. Okay, but he's a really well-spoken and very articulate person now. So how did he get from this fact where he's telling us himself, wow, I wasn't confident at all? How did he get to the point he is now? He's leading us in slowly. He's copying words out of a dictionary. Does that seem like it's going to be very effective? Let's read on. Let's see what he has to say next. Okay, the next section. In my slow, painstaking, ragged handwriting, I copied into my tablet everything printed on that first page, down to the punctuation marks. I believe it took me a day. Then, aloud, I read back to myself everything I'd written on the tablet. Over and over, aloud to myself, I read my own handwriting. I woke up the next morning thinking about those words, immensely proud to realize that not only had I written so much at one time, but I'd written words that I never knew were in the world. Moreover, with a little effort, I also could remember what many of those words meant. I reviewed the words whose meanings I didn't remember. Funny thing, from the dictionary first page right now, that aardvark springs to my mind. The dictionary had a picture of it, a long-tailed, long-eared, burrowing African animal which lives off termites caught by sticking out its tongue as an anteater does for ants. I was so fascinated that I went on. I copied the dictionary's next page, and the same experience came when I studied that. With every succeeding page, I also learned of people and places and events from history. Actually, the dictionary is like a miniature encyclopedia. Finally, the dictionary's A section had filled a whole tablet, and I went on into the B's. That was the way I started copying what eventually became the entire dictionary. It went a lot faster after so much practice helped me to pick up my handwriting speed. Between what I wrote in my tablet and writing letters, during the rest of my time in prison, I would guess I wrote 1,000,000 words. Okay, now he's telling us a little bit more, but let's look here at his syntax. So syntax is sentence structure. You might notice that he writes a lot of long sentences with a lot of commas, lots of information that he's giving us all in a short go with this short excerpt, but there's really not that many sentences. So let's look. In my slow, painstaking, ragged handwriting, he gives us 3 words to describe his handwriting. Since handwriting is a noun, that means that slow, painstaking, and ragged are adjectives. They're describing the type of handwriting he has. He doesn't just say, in my handwriting. He's telling us how agonizing it was during this beginning section. It was slow, it was painstaking, and his handwriting was ragged. Compare that to what he talks about his writing at the end. He said that this practice helped him pick up his handwriting speed, and he probably wrote 1,000,000 words. Notice that now he doesn't give us adjectives for what his writing was like, but we can assume. If at the beginning it was slow and painstaking and ragged, now it's probably quick, easy, and beautifully legible. So you don't even need to explain it because we know that if it was one way in the beginning, it's now changed. We understand that he's improving as he's learning. Now let's look at the second paragraph and let's look at how he repeats his words. Aloud, I read to myself everything I'd written on the tablet. Over and over, aloud to myself, I read my own. Just giving us that repetition of aloud, I read myself. You get the same feeling as when he was originally doing it. Notice all those commas to give you the breath. Then, aloud, I read back to myself everything I'd written on the tablet. Over and over, aloud, to myself, I read my own handwriting. His sentence mimics how he felt at the moment. That's what sentence structure can do. He could have just written, I read everything out loud to myself. One sentence, no commas, no punctuation, and just moved on. But he doesn't. His sentence follows that stuttering, painstaking, staccato movement of his original reading when he was struggling to get through it and struggling to read his own handwriting out loud. But then in the next paragraph, he's telling us, okay, I'm getting better at it. I'm getting better at it. And he remembers aardvark. And look at his description of aardvark. The dictionary had a picture of it. A long-tailed, long-eared, burrowing African mammal which lives off termites caught by sticking its tongue as an anteater does for ants. The sentence has more adjectives. It has more description. As he is becoming better at reading and writing, his sentences start to become more complex. They start to give us more information. They become longer because they're mimicking his ability. Okay, then finally, in the end, you get a hint of his true purpose. So remember, we're still looking for purpose here. We figured out who his audience is, and now we're looking at purpose. Remember, it's all about education. Just copying pages from a dictionary isn't going to teach you anything, but he tells us here what it also does. With each succeeding page, I also learned of people, places, and events from history. It's like a mini encyclopedia. A mini encyclopedia. An encyclopedia is a resource that tells you information about pretty much any topic you could think of. It's like a short biography about every single thing that's ever happened anywhere in the world. And he's right. He's making a comparison here. When he uses the word like, you can assume that he's making a simile. A dictionary is like a miniature encyclopedia, right? But really, he's not just making a simile, he's making an analogy. An analogy is like a simile. It compares two unlike things, but it's comparing them on a grander scale. It's not just saying, your eyes are like diamonds in the sky. He's saying, this thing really is like this other thing. A dictionary really is an encyclopedia. If you think about it and you stop and look, not only does aardvark explain the definition of what an aardvark is, it actually tells you information about a mammal. It tells you geography, where it's from. It compares it to what an anteater does, so you're getting references to other things. You're getting more information than just the definition, which is why he is starting to realize his true purpose here. He's learning about people, places, and events in history. If all you have had is an 8th grade education, you're going to be limited on what you know about people, places, and events in history. Or at least that's what he is saying. So that's his purpose. He realizes for himself that he has much to learn. And so he probably wants to convey how he got to that conclusion to his audience, to others. So that's where we're going to stop for today. We will continue next time with, if I can figure out how to go back a page here, we'll continue next time with moving on to the ethos, logos, and pathos. So obviously you have to go to logos next. Despite what you might have heard previously, you can't actually appeal to logos, ethos, or pathos. You can't appeal to those. You have to start with logos, because logos is your claim. Logos is your logic. It's your basic idea you're trying to convey. So what do you think Malcolm X's claim is? What is his argument? A claim you could think about as his central idea, his argument he's trying to convey. That's where we're going to start next time. So hopefully I will see you then.